Welcome. My name is Marci Baun. I am the founder and CEO of Wild Child Publishing and Freya's Bower. And this week on my publishing lounge, I have C.M. Michaels, who is the author of Sisters in Blood Vampire series. And I call you Chad. Is that okay? Can I call you Chad? Chad, would you like to tell people a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I'm the author of both fantasy and urban fantasy, are the genres that I write in, which are also my favorite genres to read. So Sisters in Blood series, the first 2 books are out now. It's going to be a 4-book series in total. So the second book in the series just came out in October called Omnipotent Blood. So the first book, Dangerous Waters, came out in September in 2013. So right now, I'm also working on a first book in my fantasy series called Kerrigan's Race. So first time I've been working at 2 books simultaneously, which has been a new experience for me. But I've been writing pretty much my whole life. The first book that I got published is Dangerous Waters, but it's always been something that I've enjoyed. And I have to credit my wife, Teresa, with giving me the kick in the butt about 3 years ago, or, just before Dangerous Waters came out, with, taking ideas that I've had and really sitting down and putting the effort in to put my own book together. So she knew that, I've really loved reading the genres and I've always enjoyed creative writing. And she gave me the inspiration I needed to sit down and write my own book.
Well, that's fabulous. I know as an artist of any type, and I consider writing a form of art, that it's so important to have people in your life who are supportive of what you do.
Absolutely. And, we have our 20-year anniversary this summer. So we've been best buds,
congratulations,
soulmates for a long time. So she's endured many nights of being my editor, whether she wants to or not sometimes. So it definitely takes a partnership.
Oh, that's awesome. So what inspired the series Sisters in Blood?
So, as I had been reading, not just vampire novels, but really, all kinds of paranormal and urban fantasy novels, as someone that, thinks of what they would do differently in those series if they were going to write their own book. I've had a lot of ideas kicking around in my head for a long time, and, what would I do different or unique or interesting? Because that's really the funnest part of being a writer is, your own take on things. So, the Sisters in Blood series, it features vampires and witches and demons and angels, and has a really broad paranormal world that comes into play. And so I had ideas about what I would like to do with my own, series of books for quite some time, and, being able to sit down and think through, the overall series that I want to put together, what I'd like to have happen. And, I had some ideas up front about, I knew I wanted it to feature a very strong female protagonist, and really be set for an older audience. So, not the teen angsty stuff. I tend to gear my writing more toward your 18 to 30 plus crowd. So, and there's a lot of unique things that I knew going in, I kind of wanted to do a little bit differently. So, one of the things about the genre is, oftentimes it's the, protagonist is being educated by whatever the paranormal creatures are in the book. And, they have all the answers, and it's her kind of adapting to their world. And really what I wanted to do coming into it is, have a lot of things happen that surprise everyone, all the main characters. So, that's one of the key features of the series is, there's a lot of things that, the coven that Brooke ends up joining, they're discovering right along with Brooke and with the reader. So I think that helps to really not have it be so cookie cutter. And there's a lot of surprises that happen where there's not one person that has the answers. And one of the other things that I wanted to do going in is, And a lot of times, while obviously there's a lot of focus on the protagonist, like there should be, I really wanted to get to know all of the main characters, and not just have the supernatural characters be kind of superficial and fill in the role in the plot, but you barely get to know them, and they're just they're not very deep characters. So one of the things that Dangerous Waters, the first book in this series, does is really let you get to know all of the main characters intimately, so that you really feel like you're a part of the family.
So what you're talking about is you wanted to have three-dimensional characters as opposed to one-dimensional.
Exactly, and have really, the best feedback that I've gotten from my readers is that, they feel like they've joined the coven, and the way that the book is portrayed, where you're discovering things right alongside Brooke, and you get to know her new family intimately, they feel like they're part of the story. And, all of the characters that you learn what's happened in their lives and how they got there. And they all serve a central part as the plot evolves, but not having it be, 90% the protagonist and having ancillary characters that just the protagonist kind of bounces off of, but really having, core characters that all help to advance the story.
Well, that's very important, I think. I mean, it is important to make sure that the protagonist is someone that people are going to relate to, that they like, that they want to root for. But it's also, I think, important to have other characters that they're going to want to like and they're going to root for. All of that combined to make a very interesting story. So I have to ask, because you were saying there were a lot of surprises for even for the coven members. They don't know what's going to happen all the time. So do you plot this out, or does your muse just kind of say, ha, this is what's going to happen now?
So kind of a combination of the two. I don't like to, write a very detailed outline of a book before I start it, or each chapter, because I do like to get a flow for, as scenes evolve, things just seem like a natural progression for what needs to happen in that scene, or I feel like a character needs to do something, and being open to those ideas and letting it see where it takes you really helps to be, spur that creativity. And sometimes you start on a path and you get a little ways down and it's like, okay, that didn't really go a direction I want to go, and you go back and start over. But really the whole premise of book 2 changed almost entirely when I got about 3 chapters in. I had an overall series plot arc for the 4-book series, and while it's still following that plot arc, what happened in book 2, about 80% of what I planned when I started writing book 2 went out the window, because to your point, I was writing a transitional scene as they're leaving Boston, and it just had an idea of, what could happen to kind of, create this conflict. And because, obviously starting up the second book, you're, things that ended in the end of the first book, and you want to get that new conflict out there. And I came up with an idea that really just wowed me from the moment I thought of it, and it just took me in a totally different direction. So, and I love how it came out, but it's, yeah, I pretty much scrapped the entire plot arc that I had for book 2.
Oh, I know the feeling. I sometimes when I was writing a book, and I thought, oh, now is about the time. It had some erotica sex scene in it. And I said, I should probably put a sex scene in it now. And the character said, no, we're not doing that. We're not filling it. And then the next thing I know, oh, well, this is going to happen. No, we want sex. We're having sex now. I'm like, okay, well, okay. I guess that's what we're doing now then. So.
It's so hard to explain to people that haven't, had that experience, because, logically you would think that, obviously it's your mind coming up with this. How could the writer be surprised? But it really is. I mean, you don't intend to go certain directions, and things just come out of nowhere, and it's like, wow, I love that. And you go off on it. So,
well, if I try to plot it out, I've plotted things out before, and then I end up not writing it because I'm bored with it.
Yep.
And so I'm a true pantser. Although I have an idea of what I want the story to do, I know that, as I said, I'll plan something and something else completely different will happen. That does occasionally end up with me writing myself into a corner.
Yeah.
It's like there's no window in this corner.
Yeah.
How am I going to get out?
There's definitely a short-term, long-term thing, because you can make something really exciting happen in a chapter, but then you sit there going, okay, where do I go from here, and how do I get back to where I wanted to end up?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. So when you write, so how do you find? Actually, when you look at the Sisters in Blood series, even though it's based in our modern day,
Yeah.
there's a lot of it that it seems like it also required a certain amount of world building.
And certainly as the series progresses, especially, so that the first book does start out in Boston, with her being a college student, and obviously creating your own take on the supernatural characters and what vampirism is in my series, and how they came about and what they can do, and all of that requires a lot of research. And the big thing in the first book that really required me to invest the time up front is obviously Brooke's new family are very old vampires that she's joining, and as you get to know their history, you're talking about going back to the 1200s, the 1300s, the 1400s. So being able to portray an accurate imagery of that time period, and when you're talking about things they've done in certain countries, having done the research to be able to describe things that actually fit that time period, and so you definitely have to invest the time up front, even when you're talking about the modern world or our current Earth, to make sure that you're come across as believable, and whether it's the cities you're describing or the time period, or even things like they're going to go on a whale watching tour, and as you're describing that, doing the research of where if they're going out from, say, Boston, where would they go, what where do they do that kind of thing, what time of year are you saying they do this, do they even see whales that time of year? So you really have to put the time in to come across as credible when you're writing, and then as the series progresses and you start getting into actually physically traveling to heaven and hell and being able to paint what those worlds look like in my series, then it gets into full-on world building.
Yeah, and so then that would probably, you've already got some experience then now that you're writing your new fantasy series, correct?
Yeah, and it definitely is beneficial. In some ways, writing fantasy is extremely exciting because you truly are starting with a whiteboard. You're not bound by any norms or what Earth actually looks like. You're creating a whole new world with all new creatures, and that gives you a lot of flexibility as an author. But being able to portray things in a way that people can still see that imagery in their head, and be able to portray things that they can't relate to the modern world. If a tree, it's pretty easy to describe a forest, and in a few words you can get that imagery in your head. But if you're gonna portray characters that don't exist and aren't just your typical werewolf vampire thing where you got a pretty good image of what those look like, or worlds that don't exist, it takes a lot more colorful dialogue to be able to accurately portray what you want that world to look like and have it come across to the reader. So it definitely takes a practice to write in that kind of space and be able to think outside the box too. It's so easy. One of the things I'm finding as I'm writing Kerrigan's Race, even though it's water world and in some ways shares very little resemblance with Earth, as you're describing things, it's so easy to fall back on your own custom things. Like, when they're going into their city, it's so easy to start describing it like any, building would be here, and, trying to challenge yourself to, okay, this is a different world. They're, trying to be more creative than just describing the typical thing like we would do here. So it's a challenge, but I really enjoy it.
It sounds like fun. I say that with a question because I know that it could also at times be very frustrating. So what I would like to do at this moment is we have a few people who are here with us live, and I'd like to see if any of them have any questions. Certainly up on the along the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see that there's a ticker tape, and they can write in questions. Does anybody have any questions for Chad right now? Well, if you do, be sure to write them along the side, and we will be happy to answer those for you. But I would also like to kind of continue talking about what's going on. So when are you going to start writing book 3 of the Sisters in Blood series, Chad? I see that you're working on Kerrigan's Race, and this does not make me that happy because I want that book 3.
So I'm going to be doing something a little bit different with this. I've pretty much been working on one book at a time up till this point. What I'm going to start doing is, since I do utilize beta readers, and we can talk more about that in a while as far as my experience with that, I've got about 10 chapters of Kerrigan's Race that I had previously written that I'm going back through and cleaning up. And then once I get that off my beta readers, from that point on, I'm going to be basically trading a chapter back and forth. So, I'll write a chapter of the third book in the Sisters in Blood, and while I'm waiting for beta feedback, I'll switch over and write the next chapter in Kerrigan's Race. So I'm hoping, if everything works out, that in the time it takes me to hear back from my beta readers, I've been productive and can continue writing and not have the gaps in my writing process. So in theory, at least, it sounds great. We'll see how it works out.
So do you write in the genre in which you like to read? Are these two genres that you really like reading?
Absolutely. Yeah. And fantasy, Laini Taylor is probably my favorite fantasy author of all time. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but if not, I would definitely recommend checking out her books. Just wonderful. We talked about imagery. I think she's the best I've ever read about being able to portray these characters that are, don't exist in reality, and being able to get that strong mental imagery in your mind of what she's describing, and, whole new worlds. She's really talented. And as far as paranormal and urban fantasy, all the big names I've read and enjoy their series. Some of my favorites, Rochelle Mead, obviously, with Vampire Academy and Bloodlines and all those. Rachel Kane. I don't know if you've ever read Kelly Armstrong. All the Otherworld series books I really enjoyed. Pretty much any of the mainstream urban fantasy. I've got a whole room full of books. So, and one of the challenges for me, finding time to write is, I love reading as well. And that's always a balancing act of, curbing my pleasure reading so that I can focus on writing.
Do you set a specific time every day, or a specific, is there a day when you just sit down and write for 2, 3, 4 hours, or is it more when the muse strikes?
Yeah. So, having a day job, that dictates during the week what I can do. But I do a lot of my writing, in the evenings, usually about 7:38, and I'll get a good 2-3 hours of writing in. And then on the weekends is where I really make a lot of headway. I'll typically spend pretty much an entire day, one of the 2 days, writing. So that's my biggest chunk. I get to really sit down and write. And for me, that's probably the biggest thing that I'm working on is if I have like a 7-8 hour window I can write in, that's really what I enjoy, is really getting immersed in the story and just letting yourself flow, being productive and taking advantage of 30 to 40 minute windows I could write in. That's hard for me because it takes me a little bit of time to get in that mindset and kind of get into the story again. And so I need to get better at that, because you know, there's a lot of time there I could be taken advantage of that are in smaller chunks of time, but just one of the things that just my personality makes it kind of hard.
No, I don't think you're alone. Now, do you do things that help feed your muse?
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so it's funny because I love listening to music to get in the mood, and then once I'm back writing again, I need to turn it off because it very quickly switches from being something that helped kind of settle my mind, get out of work mode, start getting back in the creative mode, to a point where now the juices are flowing and I'm, you know, actively the lines are coming, but yet then I'm hearing these songs in the background and it's actually distracting me. So generally I'll listen to music for, you know, 15, 20 minutes until I feel like I'm back in the flow. And then from then on, it's just kind of silence.
Now, Kamari wants to know if you develop plot first or if you do character development first.
So, and we touched on as far as kind of seat of their pants versus detailed outline earlier, but so I am more in the seat of the pants camp. Obviously, I've got an overall plot art for the series, and when I start each book and each chapter, I do kind of write down a couple points of the key things that are going to happen in that chapter. But from there, I really try and let the creativity drive where the story goes, which really does get to being more character driven. Like we were sharing earlier, the second book in the series, you know, about 3 chapters in, one of the characters I introduced, the interaction with that character, who turns out to be a demon, and Brooke, really totally changed where that entire book went. So, you know, it just felt right. It felt like, you know, an exciting place to take the storyline. So I ripped up the outline I had for book 2 and started over.
So do you do research for your projects? And if so, well, we were talking about this. You actually do research your projects. We're answering your question, Kamari Alice's question, is that you actually have to do a lot. No, it's okay. It's great. We like to answer questions. So you have to research your projects. And you were talking about, is there actually a whale watching, or were you just using that as an example in Boston?
No, that is actually one of the things in the first book in this series. You know, Raven, who is the friend that kind of befriends her in college and ends up introducing her to the supernatural world, does take her on a private whale watching tour. So while that was an example I was using of the kind of things you need to research, it really does take part in book 1 as well. So
did you get to go whale watching?
Yeah, they do go whale watching.
No, but did you?
Oh, I have not. I would love to. One of the things we want to do on our Alaska trip I was telling you about being on our bucket list is to, you know, go on the whale watching tours out there. So, and I think that's, you know, a lot of things, I can definitely draw some parallels to experiences from my own life that I share in common with the protagonist. So, you know, she loves Yellowstone National Park. I've been there 3 times. So it definitely has some things that come across. But yeah, it's simple things like that, like, you know, a whale watching tour, just as an example. It's amazing the amount of research that you really have to put in order to come across as credible. And it would be so easy to just think, well, I mean, how hard could it be? You know, they get on a boat to go out and look at whales. But if you don't put the time in to think about, okay, the story's set in December, are there even whales that far north in the ocean in December? You know, and thinking through those kind of things to where you don't end up writing a story that somebody that's been on a whale watching tour or lives in Boston says, well, that could never happen. And then you just lose all credibility.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. We're actually going whale watching this Monday.
Awesome. Now,
I don't know if we'll see any whales.
Cool. Like down by the LA area, or where are you going?
Yeah. Yeah. We'll be going out of like Redondo Beach area.
Nice.
So, which is LA. But there are a lot of tours throughout. You know, there's a lot of places that you can get on whale watching tours. And I would imagine that this is for 4-H. So I wouldn't imagine that 4-H would schedule a whale watching tour if they didn't think there might actually be some whales, as opposed to just everybody going out there and getting seasick. So
Yeah,
that wouldn't be too fun. Hopefully it's sunny and there's not any rain, so you can cross your fingers for that one.
There you go.
What's kind of interesting about this whole question about doing your research and then how do you organize it? I mean, a lot of times for me, when I'm writing, I don't necessarily know what's going to happen next. And then when if I'm writing something that requires research, then I'll actually stop what I'm doing and go to do the research before I get back into the writing again, so that I make sure that what I'm doing is accurate. And I had a comment. Someone made a comment on a book post. I was promoting something, and it was about a Western. It was about a Western erotic romance, and that's historical. So historicals really, they require a great deal amount of research, just like you were talking about earlier, where you were saying she's going to be, if she's moving through these different times, then you're going to need to have all of this information about what actually happened back then, what language they used. Yeah. I'm not saying like a colloquialism. They wouldn't necessarily use some of our idioms of today. And so you have to be careful not to do that. And the comment was, well, it's fiction. What kind of research is necessary for fiction? It's a good thing he wasn't close, because I wanted to reach through the screen and just go, and he said, and he also said, well, it's just romance. And it's like, no. It's people who read these different genres, whether it's spy or thriller or mystery or the police procedurals or the romance or the historical, they're, like historical fiction or science fiction, they love history. Yeah. So they're gonna know history. And if you get it wrong, they are going to be coming for your jugular. Yeah. And right? Yeah, right.
Your point, regardless of how wonderful of a story that you've written and how much they identify with the characters and enjoy the characters, if they're taken out of the flow of the book because they keep reading things that don't come across as credible, you lose your audience. So, it really does take a tremendous amount of research as you're writing. And I see a question over on the right there about, does it make the process take longer? And absolutely. But Marci, as you were touching on, you can be right in the middle of a scene and the words are flowing and you wish you could continue, but you get to a point where, there's an element of the story that you need to get some, facts on and be able to, describe it. So oftentimes, I'll have to stop myself, and it could be anything from, they're traveling to a new city and I'm starting to paint, where they're going to be set in that city, and, is getting a feel. And thank God for like Google Earth and all the tools that are available now where you can do things that in the past just wouldn't have been possible. But, you're trying to describe what beaches they go to, and, even just like the minor navigation that you give as they're going from wherever their house is set to where the beach is, and being able to mention a couple actual roads that you would take to get there. And, those kind of things, yeah. you really have to invest the time to be able to come across as credible.
Absolutely. And you need to, thank you for the props, by the way, Kamari Ellis. You need to keep, what people don't understand too is that sometimes we get so into the research and we find all of this interesting information and we desperately want to put all of that information into our story. But, there comes a point when you realize we really just need to give them what they need and then let it, and then, you know what I mean? Because otherwise it becomes a data dump. Yeah.
Yeah.
It
becomes a fine balancing act of, portraying enough about whatever the situation is to where you come across as credible without kind of oversharing and getting to a point where I'm not that interested in, like if the character is a barista, being able to have a couple of things in there that show that, you invested some time with the kind of things they would do, in that setting, and having that job and some of the language that would be common to them, but not, the story isn't about working in a coffee shop. So, there's that fine line of sharing enough to where you come across as you've done your homework and you're able to have that aspect of the character come across as believable, but not, bombarding somebody. Hey, look at all the research I did. I'm going to tell you every single thing I found.
Which, the first time, someone saying you can't write the scene and then come back after you do the research. The only thing is then finding that scene again and finding the train of thought of what you needed to do. And for me, I'd rather write, and as if I hit something and I need the research stop to do the research, so that it's fresh in my mind of where my train of thought it was in the storyline. But I know people who do come back after they've done the research. Gosh, what was I saying? I got derailed with that with the question. Well, I have the first time I was going to tell you the first time that it's different, but it's similar. The first time I wrote a story, so per se, was I used to do portrayals of historical people, and so up until that point, I'd written a lot of essays. Mm-hmm. And research papers. And when you go to perform that for people, especially kids, it can become, if you are doing a lecture, you're not going to keep the kids very long. So, that was one of the places, and this was long before I started Wild Child. And that was one of the places where I cut my teeth. It was on the stage performing these shows. And it really taught me a lot about...
I don't think you'd ever get me on the stage.
I would say, or stupid, to be honest, because I got up in front of like 300 third graders. And they have no filter. They have no filter. And if they don't like you, it's painful. It was like, this, but it was really, what it was, I just needed to tell stories. And so it becomes about writing stories, and then you quickly, I'd been an avid reader anyway, just like you. I think most authors are, I would venture to say, we're voracious readers. And
I think you almost would, if you didn't enjoy reading, and I know there's different schools of thought about some authors like to read in genres they don't write in, versus myself, where I enjoy reading in the same genres I write in. But if you didn't enjoy reading anything, to me they're so correlated. I don't really know how you would enjoy writing, because really what I enjoy about reading is the mental imagery and the feeling of being able to be taken to a different place. And that's, as you're writing, you get to create that world, but it's really the same kind of part of your brain that, ties to both. So yeah, I personally, all the authors that I know are avid readers as well.
Would you like to have any of the abilities that Brooke has in Sisters in Blood?
She has a lot of abilities. And one of the things, we talked earlier about how, the way the story unfolds, everyone continues to be surprised, and there's no one that has all the answers. Well, she continues to uncover new abilities as the series progresses. So, and that goes back to her ancestry, which you learn about in the first book. But so yeah, there are a whole lot of things that she can do that I would love to be able to do.
I bet. So I also wanted to talk a little bit about what we were talking about before I started recording, which was you like to do wildlife photography, and do you not only like to photograph the animals, but do you know a lot about the animals? Do you do research on the animals, um,
Yep.
or are you just a lover of nature?
So we enjoy, wildlife photography, reading about wildlife. We have, we spend a lot of time reading books of people that, you know, hike across Yellowstone and write about, the animals, like when they reintroduce the wolves and everything, and the nature experts, and being able to get their inside stories about things, parts of the park and that you can't get to, and really sharing experiences. So we do, watching documentaries about animals on Discovery Channel and that. So definitely a passion of both mine and my wife. So we really enjoy being around animals and, having pets of our own. One of our strong likes that we have in common, thankfully.
What's your favorite animal?
For me, it'd probably be a wolf. Bears and wolves are both among our favorites, but given that we love dogs, and being a cousin of that, and just the wildness that they represent, and being able to have been fortunate enough to see them in the wild, and see them hunting and living a life that we're fortunate enough to be able to see. And I hope that continues, but as the population continues to grow, you wonder how much longer that we're going to have that kind of opportunity. So, they're just such beautiful creatures, and, see them exist in their own, natural habitat is wonderful.
There are a couple now outside of LA, up in the Los Angeles National Forest. There are a couple of rescue groups for wolf dogs. And one of them, a few years ago, and they still do this, you can actually go out there and visit them. And of course, it costs a certain amount of money, but you can go visit them, and you can go for hikes with them. So they'll bring like three or four of these wolf dogs. And we did it. They also have a full moon hike.
Wow,
which
cool.
In the summertime, wouldn't that be cool? I mean, I've been wanting to do that for a long time, and I took my daughter, and my husband came with me. Yes, he did. I'm trying to remember. Yes, he did. But we went out there, and we went hiking with the wolves, and the alpha female took a liking to her, and
cool.
actually jumped up and licked her face, and they said that was very, very rare. Her name was Maya. She was this beautiful white part Arctic wolf.
That's something that you guys will remember forever. So that's really cool.
Well, I'd like to go back. My plan is to go back again. But I say that if you ever get out to LA, you need to contact me so that I can get you in touch with the company, and you could go on a hike with with their wolves. I think they do a monthly wolf hike, so you can't do it it's not like every week, and it's usually on a Saturday. So
okay.
You'd have to make the plan, but it's certainly worth it. I mean, it's amazing, absolutely amazing. Do you find that, I may have already asked this question, but do you find that that your photography and everything influences your writing?
Well, I would say, things from my own personality definitely come across in your character. So, I mentioned that Brooke enjoys going to Yellowstone National Park. You get to know in the first book that was a special place for her and her parents growing up. A lot of the movies that get described in the first book are some of my favorite movies. So, it's set in Boston, and I'm a huge Patriots fan. So I think there's things that actually come out in your characters that reflect, your own taste and personality. And it's fun to see different things in your characters that, maybe someone in your life, you kind of was the inspiration for that aspect of that character's personality. And you can kind of, it's almost like an inside thing of, when you're reading that, who kind of inspired that character. So it's fun to kind of paint that into your characters.
What's interesting is some of the characters that I've written about are completely fictional. So they aren't necessarily inspired. They're not necessarily inspired by anybody.
And that's typically not like an entire character, but one aspect of a character where, either like certain quirks or sayings that they have, or just a certain, type, whether it's, a favorite interest of theirs, or, an expression that they have, but sometimes those kind of things come out in your characters.
Now you write really long books. To me, those books, they're easy for me to read, but as an author, if I hit 15,000 words, I'm like, woohoo, I'm doing the happy dance. If I finish it, so, but see, I'm really, my story will be about 15,000 words, and I'll be, whoop, I'm done. Woo, I hit 15,000 words. That's awesome. And, but you write, some of them are 90,000. Over 100,000.
Yeah, Dangerous Water is 153,000. So the second book in the series is about 120. So short, but still fairly lengthy.
Short, 120,000. Wow.
And that's it definitely is an investment of a long time to pull a book of that length together. And, I don't really go into it with a preconceived notion of how long the book's going to be. I mean, obviously you've got guidelines. I mean, you have a target range, but really, you have the kind of high level plot arc of where you want to go in a book, and then kind of see where the story takes you. And when it reaches that natural point, whatever that adds up to is what the book ends up being. So, I'm not someone that sits down and, tries to have this chapter is going to be, 4,500 words, and I'm at 4,000, so I better start wrapping it up now. I mean, I kind of let it flow and see where it takes you.
Wow. The average length of my chapter is less than 2,000 words.
Yeah. And it's nice actually to get a little variation
it's between
there. So
between 1,500 to 2,000, I have a hard time going past that. And maybe it's just, I think, in smaller sound bites, or maybe I don't know, maybe it has to do with what I'm writing. So when someone, and it doesn't bother me if someone writes longer chapters, it's just when I write, mine don't come out that long.
Yeah. And it's, the scene kind of dictates it. So, and it's good actually, both when I'm reading and writing, to have a little variation. So, if a certain scene lends itself to a, 800,000 word chapter, and then you get into a bigger point of the story's happening, and it happens to be a 4,000 or 5,000 word chapter, having that variation, I think, helps alter the pace of the book and not feel like, every chapter they take on is going to be an epic marathon to get to the end of the chapter. So, it is good to have a little variation as you're going through as well.
So this, without giving any spoilers, what did you think of The Force Awakens?
I thought it was, and regardless of what my opinion is, I'm sure I'll offend half the audience, but I thought it was the best of any of the series so far. So I know the biggest criticism against it is that it so closely mirrored the plot from the original first movie. But to me, they blended in the characters from the original series perfectly. I thought the new characters that are going to kind of carry this story forward couldn't have been cast better. The acting was superb. Obviously the special effects is going to be good with that kind of a budget of a movie, but I thought they just did an incredible job. I have to admit, I was a little leery hearing that there was another semi-Death Star plot to it, because I feel like they've been down that road a few times. But even the way they portrayed that ended up being a really unique thing about it. So we loved it. Teresa, I don't think I could count on one hand the time that she's been willing to go to a movie twice in the theater, and we both saw it together twice. Wow. So that tells you a lot. How about you?
I liked it. I think because it mirrored the first one. For me, it was kind of a 7.5, but I felt I liked it so much better than we saw. They had number 1 in this series. I don't even remember what it was. Yes, it was horrible. And so then I never saw the next. I never saw the next 2.
Was kind of hard to swallow.
It was so bad that it was. I haven't seen the 2 and 3, so it maybe we'll sit down and watch that. But I'm looking forward to the next one, and I had a suspicion, and then someone, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to ruin it, but I have a suspicion about Ray.
Yeah, there's
and I think I'm not the only one. Well, someone was saying that it's already been revealed within Disney's interactive game.
Oh, well, I hope that's not true, but I certainly am not going to go looking for it. I prefer to be surprised. Well,
then I won't tell you. I'm just going to say my suspicion was true as far as what they're saying. But, it's very possible that once we watch that next movie, that it's not what we thought at all. But I was almost from the beginning, I was like, oh, I bet. I kind of had a suspicion. But I love the fact that they have it's a strong heroine.
Yeah.
And that the story is really around her. I mean, Princess Leia was like a great heroine too, but then it quickly shifted. It quickly shifted to Luke Skywalker and Han Solo.
And just, it's hard to describe how, and really books are this way too. But within the first couple of scenes of that movie, you automatically identify with her, and it didn't take long at all before I was just totally on board and rooting for her. And, being a relatively unknown actress with no history to draw upon for the audience, to be able to just, win the audience over so quickly. It's a credit to her as an actress, but also to, the way they did the movie. I felt like she just pulled you in immediately. And, I think books are that way too. The books that I really love are when you just start reading and just right away you connect with the protagonist, and you're on board from page 1. And, I think that's so important to really, grab the reader's interest.
It is, when I read submissions, I do have an acquisitions editor, but when I've read submissions, I have made decisions off of one line for rejection. Like I'll read the first line and go, oh yeah, no. Yeah. And I mean, that sounds horrible. Sometimes I'll say, well, I think to myself, I should give them a little more of a chance, and I'll get like 2 or 3 paragraphs in. No, that was a waste of
it's not getting any better.
Sorry, it's not getting any better. The idea might be great, but the execution of it was more guillotine than than finesse. So yeah, it's kind of, it's very interesting. So in that sense, Ray is very similar to Brooke in that you have these 2 very powerful women who don't know how powerful they are, and they discover it as it goes along.
Yeah, you could draw a pretty close parallel between that. So, and I think being able to write strong characters in general, but, especially a strong female protagonist, and both my series actually feature a strong female protagonist. And it's just, to me, it's an opportunity to really present a character that, gets out of the helpless, can't do anything right, look into the man that they're supposed to be matched up with to save them. I mean, that kind of stuff really turns me off. So, I mean, being able to write a dynamic, strong character that, is flawed. I mean, you never want any character to be, never make mistakes and just everybody loves them, because that's just a boring character to read. But, having a personality that people can like and identify with. I mean, not to bash the Twilight series, because I enjoyed reading those books and the movies to some degree. But that's one of the things that was hard for me when I was reading the books is, the main character is kind of a weak character. And, it's just definitely, something I look for in books is to have someone that I can really get behind.
No, I agree, and I know there was a meme running that went around the internet about, in the '80s we had people like Princess Leia and Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and nowadays, not so much now, but when Twilight came out, they had that, and it's like, what kind of example does that set for young girls?
Yeah.
And I think it's important to set a realistic example, because, I mean, Princess Leia, there's no question she was a kick-ass heroine. But she also knew when she needed help. She could take care of herself, but she accepted help as well, knowing, that they had to work together to make it happen. And I think Buffy was very similar in that, it's like, okay, we're going to have to work together. I can take care of myself, and I'm also know when I'm going to need help with something. So, I think it's important for girls and boys to have strong role models to follow. Not that you really want them to follow fictional characters, but you want to have examples for them of these strong, what I'm talking about these strong characters that you can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And her, her favorite vampire that she describes as Celine, and that, there's a lot of aspects of, that character that she ends up kind of taking on. So, definitely something that the character looks up to as well as those kind of strong women role models. So, but yeah. So with the people we have on, any other questions that you guys want to field about either the first two books that you've read or about where the series is headed?
Well, I think we can. So what can we expect out of book 3? And when can we expect book 3?
Let's handle the first part of that first. So this is going to be a 4-book series. And for those of you that have read Dangerous Waters, the prologue in Dangerous Waters actually teases what is going to be basically where we get back to at the end of book 3. So, the next story, picks up from where Omnipotent Blood leaves off, and we'll get back to where the prologue was from the first book. So I have a pretty firm end point of kind of where we'll be, and that, a lot of ground to cover between where the second book leaves off and what would get us back to that point. So, and then the fourth book in the series will, for those that have the prologue fresh in their mind, she's in a pretty tough spot in that prologue. So there's a lot
I was going to
say
it was very grim
from that point on. So
I was going to say, I remember reading that was very grim. And I thought, oh, I'm not sure if this series, because it's
I
so
lost the
going to
audio.
end.
You cut out on me a little bit there. But yeah, it definitely is a pretty dire situation that she finds herself in. So there's a lot of conflict to resolve, and then really carry it from there to the end of the series. So, I've got a good firm idea of where book 3 and book 4 will head. As far as timing, It generally takes me about a year to write a book and then, start the editing process. Dangerous Waters came out in September of 2013, and Independent Blood came out in October of 2015. So somewhere probably in the 18-month range is what I'd like to have the next one out.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges I have, obviously, having a full-time day job is, taking advantage of nights and weekends is great, but it takes a while to get a 120, 140,000 word book pulled together.
Do you have an average word count that you do in one sitting?
Wow, it varies wildly. Obviously, on the weekends when I'm writing for 7 or 8 hours, sometimes I'll even get as much as 2 chapters, draft of 2 chapters pulled together, upwards of 7,000-8,000 words. But on a night, some nights you sit down and it just, your fingers can't type fast enough, and you end up writing a good chunk of a chapter in 2-3 hours. And other nights you sit there looking at the same sentence for 40 minutes. And it's like pain. Stick a fork in your eye sometimes, but
or sometimes on nights like that, it's like, oh, look, a squirrel.
Yeah. Oh, the laundry needs to be done. I guess I'll do that.
Laundry. When you're looking at doing laundry instead of writing, it's going bad. That's when really it's going really, really bad.
You can want to write as much as you want, but whether your mind's in that spot to have the creativity coming. Some nights you sit down and just boom, you're right in, and the words are just coming to you, and the scene, you can picture what's going to happen next. And other nights it's just like trying to pull teeth to get that kind of thought process going.
Well, I want to thank you for coming today, and because we're going to be wrapping it up here. It's almost 5:00, but I want you to be able to, or people to be able to find you. And so how would they find you? How do they find you on Facebook, your website, Twitter, or where would they find you?
Yeah, so the easiest way to get all my social links is off my website. So cmmichaels.com, and you can get my Facebook, Twitter, all the social links off there. So I am very interactive on my Facebook author page. So, when people leave me messages or posts, I try to respond as quickly as I can. And even the ads I run on Facebook, I respond to every comment that's shared on the ads. And, I think it's readers appreciate that. And I love seeing what readers have to say. So, I encourage everyone to reach out to me and share your thoughts on the books as you read them or questions that you have. And I'd love to get to know everyone.
Well, thank you, Chad, for spending an hour with me. And next week I will be interviewing. Oh, my brain just went. I know. Well, so stop by in the Publishing Lounge again next week at 4 p.m. that specific time, and I know I have a great lineup for you. If I could only, this is so bad. I can't remember who's coming in, but I do have a really, really good lineup. And it'll be a lot of fun. I've had a great time talking with you. I had no idea that you were a wildlife photographer, as well as being an author extraordinaire of paranormal and soon fantasy. Well, I guess I would say you're also a fantasy author because you're in the process of writing the book. And if you are looking to find me, you can find me, Marci Baun, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on Google+. You can find me at, you can check out freyasbauer.com. That's FREYASBOWER.com. That you can also find Chad's books there, but you can find them on Amazon and iTunes and Kobo and Barnes and Noble and all of these different places. You'll be able to go in soon and and ask to see if your library can get them in ebooks as well. I just realized I didn't have them on overdrive, so I'm going to be putting them on overdrive in the next couple of weeks, and so then in 6 weeks' time they'll be available, so you can actually go into the librarian and say, "Hey, I want to read this book. Could you get it for your collection?" So, which will be fabulous. And you can also find us at wildchildpublishing.com or marcibaun.com or finallypublished.com, or just Google me on Google Marci Baun, and you'll find, and I'll come up. So, which I'm sure I think you can with C.M. Michaels as well in his Sisters in Blood series. So thank you for listening, and I hope to see you next week.
All right. Thanks for hosting.